Good morning, everyone that's already joined the call. My name is Andy Bradley. I'm a Director of Delta Energy and Environment. Welcome to everyone who's joining the call today. Lots of people I can see coming into the call still, so we'll wait for people to join. Probably be starting the webinar in 2 or 3 minutes' time. We're planning that the webinar today will last around 40 minutes. We'll certainly try and keep to that time. We know how busy everyone is. As there's a lot of people on the call today, we have everyone on silent, but you can interact with us by using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. So at any point during the webinar, you can send us a question or make comments. Those comments and questions will be private to us. We will try and respond to as many of those as we can at the end of the call, and certainly if we can't respond because of lack of time during the webinar, we'll come back to everyone individually after the webinar. We also will record the webinar and we'll make that available afterwards so that you'll be able to share it with colleagues or indeed look back at different parts of the webinar. We'll be sending out the slides afterwards as well. So don't feel the need to take notes during the call. We'd be happy to share with you the presentation that we're going to talk through in the next 40 minutes or so. So thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. I can see people still joining the call, so we'll give it another couple of minutes, I think, before we start the webinar, but we'll be starting very shortly. Thank you. Okay, welcome to those that have just joined the call. My name is Andy Bradley from Delta Energy and Environment. I'm a director here at Delta. Welcome to everyone who's joining the call. Just to recap on the approach and agenda for today, we've got a lot of people on the webinar today so that we've silenced all of the lines. However, you can interact with us by using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can ask us a question during the webinar. Questions and comments will be private to us, and we will try and address some of these at the end of the webinar, subject to time. If we can't respond during the webinar, we certainly will come back to you individually at a later point in the next few days. We are recording the webinar today, so we'll make that available afterwards so you can share with colleagues, and also we'll be sending out the slides of the presentation from today's session. If you have any problems with the webinar software or whatever, you can email Delta, use the email address info@delta-ee.com, or you can call Jan or Emma on 44131 625 1011. So if you have any problems, please use the email address or that telephone number. But I think I can see the number of people joining the call has started to increase less slowly. So I think it's now 4 minutes past 10, so we should kick off the webinar. We'll try and keep it to about 40 minutes today, so we'll move through things fairly quickly, and we're really keen to have some time for questions at the end. So in terms of the presentation today, it will be given by myself, and I'm joined by Julian Jansen, who's manager of our energy storage research service, and Wout Grittens, who works with Julian on our energy storage research. Andrew Turton, who joined us from AECOM a few months ago, is also an important part of our energy research team, but is not available to join us today. In terms of other members of our team at Delta that are involved, John Slow, who many of you know, is involved in our ongoing research, and we'll also have some external relationships with associates, including Dave Openshaw, who used to work with the UK Power Networks, and also Dan Rassler, who's based in California and spent many years in the industry there, mainly with EPRI. So we have a very experienced and broad research team. That's the basis for our ongoing analysis of this topic. So I'll just very quickly give you an introduction to our company. I know there's quite a number of people on the call today who are familiar with Delta, but also quite a number who are perhaps new to our company. So I'll very briefly just give an overview of Delta and an introduction to our energy storage research, and then I'll hand over to Julian and Wout to talk through the main part of the presentation. So in terms of Delta, we're a energy research consulting company, and our key mission is to help clients navigate the transformation of the energy system that we see happening, by a large part of which is happening because of the growth in distributed energy. And this is leading the energy system to become a more distributed, a more customer-centric, and a more service-orientated system in future. And really it's that transformation that is at the heart of everything that we do at Delta. So we are a knowledge-based consultant, and we bring insight on customers, on technology, on the customer side of the meter in particular, the policy and regulation of distributed energy markets, and business model innovations. And we help our clients develop forecast scenarios for the future, analyze the markets, the routes to market, assess their strategies, and develop effective customer propositions. And you see on the graphic on the left of your screen there a whole range of topics that we cover at Delta. Our clients are primarily the major energy companies in Europe, so the big utility companies, but also many of the major international manufacturing companies, both in Europe and elsewhere in Asia and North America. So in terms of energy storage, for us, energy storage really sits at the heart of a lot of our research. We have ongoing subscription research services on generation, such as micro-CHP and larger scale distributed power. We have ongoing research services around customer side of the meter markets, a heat insight service, heat pumps, for example, low carbon heating in residential houses. But also we do a lot of work around the digital part of the residential market, so the connected home and customer data analytics. And increasingly we're doing work with network companies who are becoming much more exposed to the growth in markets on the customer side of the meter, so particularly around peak demand modelling and innovation for network operators. So you can see energy storage really sits at the heart of most of our research here at Delta. So in terms of our energy storage research, our focus is very much on deployment models and understanding the opportunities. So the thrust of what we do is really around innovation, new products coming into this market, understanding the business models that are working and having success, gaining traction with customers, insights into how the markets are going to develop, focusing really on the European market landscape and how that's evolving. So looking at applications, channels, and customer propositions, all of these commercial and strategic issues are really the focus of our energy research, so energy storage research service. So for the people on the call today who are already subscribers, they'll be receiving these deliverables as a combination of in-depth reports, the topics of which are really guided by subscribers, so we're always looking for feedback from our subscribers as to what interesting topics they would like us to look at in depth. Alongside that, we produce on an ongoing basis country reports and a case study library of energy storage applications and business models. We produce ongoing news and briefing notes for subscribers on event summaries and policy updates, and we provide tailored support, so free inquiry service, Ask the Analyst. So our subscribers will be receiving all of these deliverables as part of their subscription, For those of you on the call today who aren't subscribers, we very much hope that today's call will show you some of the work that we're doing and get your interest in this research, and we'd be delighted to have some discussion with you after the webinar around how this research might help you make good decisions and develop your own energy storage activities. So now moving on to the main part of the webinar. We entitled the webinar "The Reality Behind the Hype." So what's the hype? Well, I think we're all aware that there's been a big mainstream profile for energy storage over the last year or so. Tesla has grabbed everyone's attention and created a fantastic opportunity perhaps for many other companies to start developing successful businesses around the energy storage space. But there's been a wave of interest and hype and optimism around the role of energy storage and the impact energy storage will have in future. So what we're going to do in the webinar is just walk through our thinking and how we see the reality behind this hype. But before we do that, we thought it would be interesting just to get the audience to share their view, what their current thinking is on residential battery storage in Europe. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask people to just select one of these options, just so that at the beginning of the webinar we can see what the consensus view is of the people on the call today. Do you think by 2020 residential battery storage in Europe will be a mass market? So by 2020, so less than 5 years away, do you think residential battery storage will be in millions of homes in Europe? Do you think it will be a big deal, but in around 1 million homes, say, in Europe? Do you think it will still be immature but becoming established, so perhaps in a few 100,000 homes in Europe? Or do you think it will be still niche, still embryonic, below, say, 100,000 installations across Europe? So really we're just interested in what you think, what the audience thinks, and then we'll move through the main part of the presentation and show you what our thinking is and how we see the market developing. So now we're ask you to submit a response to that question. I can see the answers coming in. We'll just wait. So we're above 80% of people have voted so far, so just give it a few more seconds. So close the poll in 3, 2, 1. If you want to vote now. Okay, I think let's close the poll there. So we've got about 85% of people who voted. So if we can, Julian, if we can publish that poll. Yeah. So the poll, I'm not sure if you can see this on your screen, but the poll shows that 7% of people think it will be in millions of homes by 2020. 32% of people think it will be a pretty big deal. So around a third of you think it would be in around a million homes. 50% think it will be immature but becoming established, so perhaps a few thousand, 100,000 homes. And 11% think it will be niche, still embryonic, so still below 100,000. So quite a spread of views, but the majority view is really immature but becoming established. So that's quite an interesting perspective to have. It's what the industry thinks, if you like, because we've got well over 100 people participating in that poll on the call today. So at this point, Julian, I'll hand over to you and you can lead us through the main part of the presentation and share what Delta thinks on this topic.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. And well, great to see you all participating in the poll and to get your view. And actually, well, let's look at what the market looks like today before we look at how it will look by 2020. And if we look at the installed base of integrated residential PV plus battery systems today, well, really what we can say is that the market is tiny. There's maybe around 35,000 systems installed by the end of 2015. This is our view. And as you can see, Germany is by far the strongest market. It dominates the European residential battery storage space. But we do believe that the UK and Italy provide good opportunities in the future. And overall, there's quite a mixed bag of drivers out there. And it'd be interesting to see how it develops. And that's really one of the questions we'll look to answer throughout the webinar today. But, you know, what strikes me is let's compare energy storage to maybe some of the other technologies we look at Delta. Let's compare it to solar PV. Now, obviously, solar PV has had a massive boom over the past 15 years or so. But today, you know, there's several million installations across Europe. So this is really a mass market. It's in millions of homes. Let's take another technology, heat pumps. Well, the market is stagnating a bit. It's over 1 million homes across Europe. So, it's doing quite well, but on the grand scheme of the heating market, it's relatively minor. And maybe what's most comparable in terms of installed base today might be something like micro CHP, which has a similar installed base across Europe, but it has taken a lot longer to get there. So, residential energy storage really got to about 35,000 systems installed in three years. So that's quite impressive. So the key question will be, will that growth continue? And actually, what we can see is that the interest is huge. So there's a lot. There's a lot of different players already active in the market and even more looking to become active in the market. And what we have identified as 3 main groups currently active, which are manufacturers and specialized storage providers, companies with a PV background, but also energy suppliers and the big utilities. Importantly, it's a complex market, and it will probably be quite hard to get into the market and get a good market share. However, there will be a wide variety of opportunities and structures to be exploited. The key question is, who is best positioned to do so? And that's really one of the questions we look to address throughout our research. So where we are right now is, the market is tiny today, but let's look how it will develop and what the key drivers are. And for this bit, I will pass over to my colleague Valds, who will talk you through those.
Thanks, Julian. One of the main things we're looking at to see beyond the hype right now is end customer economics. In the graph below, you can see our calculation results for end customer paybacks in 3 main markets we have identified, which are UK, Germany, and Italy. Thing to note about Germany is that in our calculations we have assumed that there is no subsidy for storage, and also, as you can see in the graph, we have identified 2 different offers for customers. First would be new installation of PV plus storage, and second would be retrofitting storage to an existing PV system. As you can see from the results, overall the paybacks are quite long, especially for retrofitted battery installations. Thus, mainly the target market would be early innovators or people who are willing to pay the high upfront cost of new PV plus storage system in order to get better return for the investment. And as you can see, Germany and Italy are the most promising markets with the best economics, while UK is kind of at the early stages of the development. And we think that because of how the end customer paybacks look right now, more focus needs to be put on soft factors as a drivers for the market.
I'm sure many people on the call today will be just thinking about the subsidy question in Germany. You said that we've excluded the subsidy from this payback calculation. Can you just explain why we've excluded it and what impact the subsidy might have on that payback if we were to include it?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So we've excluded the subsidy just because in order to make these calculation results more comparable between countries, and our calculations show that if we include these subsidies, the payback period would go down by 1 to 2 years in both cases. So in addition to that, we have also looked at other drivers for the market and identified what's the importance of these drivers in current market situation. So as you can see, in terms of economic drivers, returns from the investment for PV plus storage aren't that great, so it's not a big driver for the market right now, as there are long end customer paybacks and high upfront costs. However, improvements in self-sufficiency that can lead to decreasing energy bills for the customer is one of the biggest drivers right now, as addition of battery storage can lead to self-sufficiency improvement by around 20 to 30%. And thing to note here is that we're talking about self-sufficiency, not self-consumption from the PV system. And thirdly, future-proofing and having partial independence from grid electricity prices is a key driver for the PV plus residential storage market, as customers seek comfort in not being dependent on grid electricity. Besides the economic drivers, another thing we have identified is 4 soft factors that can drive the market. Right now, firstly, dislike for big utilities and wanting to be independent from them is a driver that differs between different European countries. For example, this can be a strong driver in Germany, while not as strong in UK. Secondly, security of energy supply and having an emergency backup is a driver that's not strong in Europe, just because the grid is stable. However, this could change in the future. Thirdly, being green and contributing to a bigger cause is a driver that, similarly to dislike for big utilities, is strong in some countries and not so strong in the others. And lastly, owning the coolest and latest gadget is not really a big driver right now and can only attract a niche group of people. So overall, as you can see, the drivers are not that strong currently. So it seems that the hype is exaggerating how the market actually looks. However, by 2020, it looks more promising, and our forecast shows that PV plus storage, especially in Italy and Germany, the payback will go down by around 50%, and we'll be able to appeal to a wider group of people, while in UK the reductions are not as high, mainly due to electricity price that we have forecasted being not as high as Germany and Italy. So the UK market would still mainly attract early innovators. And another thing to note from these results is that battery retrofitting proposition becomes more attractive and narrows the gap between installation of new PV plus storage. However, another thing to note is that, as you can see, the paybacks go as low as 7 years, but our heat insight service research from previous years shows that in order to reach mass market, in UK, for example, the payback should be below 5 years. And I'll hand it over to Julian.
Well, thanks a lot, Valts, for that. Let me continue the presentation. Actually, what we see is that, well, actually a lot of the drivers aren't particularly strong. And even by 2020, customer economics, despite improving greatly, are not too convincing if we take this kind of magical 5-year payback as a tipping point. So, well, how can we then unlock the mass market and really get to the customer? And part of what we think is that we'll need attractive customer propositions that provide additional value. So if we look at some of the additional propositions already out there in the market, what we've done here at Delta is compile a case study library of around 30 different deployment cases for energy storage. As you can see, this is currently being developed as we go along. And a lot of these is, as you can see on the slide, actually to do with residential battery storage and providing additional value proposition for this. So one thing we want to focus on today is we've just picked out this as an example because the Fennecan Ampard VPP platform is one of the most, or pays most of the highest value to the end customer of around 400 euros per year. And really what it does is the customer purchased the system in order to increase self-consumption. But within the energy pool model, the system is controlled by the Ampard Energy Manager, which adds VPP functionalities. So, for example, could tap into primary control reserve markets in Germany, or as it does already in Switzerland. And through this, provide the customer with additional value, which greatly improves the proposition. There's a wide range of other examples we've also identified. I mean, I could talk around all these different value propositions all webinar long, but given that we've got a bit of limited time, I just wanted to give you a high-level introduction to some, such as the Moxa grid share model in the UK, whereby customer receives £75 per year for giving Moixa and their partner access to the systems and buy into ancillary services markets in the UK. In Germany, the Sonnen community, really taps into that motivation by German customers to contribute to the energy transition, and it enables peer-to-peer trading and gives customers a transparent view of energy production and consumption, and really most importantly gives the customer a nice discount on the Sonnen system. There's a few other models we've identified already, and we think these will really, as we go along, drive the market, so towards 2020, when we move beyond the early innovators, when we move beyond self-consumption. As you can see, there's VPP models, leasing models in Germany and other European countries, but also in the US being developed today, and we only see them becoming more important. And we've compiled case studies on most of these, and I'd be very happy to have a chat to our subscribers if you've got any questions on these, or if you're looking to become a subscriber, drop me an email, and happy to give our view on some of these value propositions. So moving on, we'd just like to summarize our view of where the market is going. And today, what we really see is residential energy storage is located at the customer behind the meter, and the primary value is captured by the customer through self-consumption. But what we actually see happening is that this will change, and part of the value will be shared with, let's say, the energy system, so i.e. through ancillary services. And one model we see emerging is really the shared value, so the customer gets a lot of revenue for providing access to their system, and manufacturers or vendors might use this to really sell more systems ultimately. A second way would be to really focus on providing grid services through behind-the-meter storage, where the customer just receives some compensation. Val's introduced our economic model earlier on, and actually let's look at what this type of value proposition would need to look like to get beyond that magical point of a 5-year end customer payback. And what we can see is by 2020, to achieve a payback of below 5 years, in Germany customers would have to receive between 250 and 400 euros per year of additional revenue. In the UK this number is even higher, so it'd be up to 900 euros or 650 to 750 pounds. In Italy it looks very similar to Germany. But the good news is, well, actually the Fenwick and Part model I introduced earlier, well, they're already paying 400 euros a year. So it really moves into the right direction, and through this, well, could residential energy storage become a mass market? So we've spoken a lot about residential energy storage. I guess that's the focus of our webinar today, and overall, as part of our ongoing research, we do focus on distributed energy storage. But around Delta, we look at a lot of other technologies, and we look at a lot of other things that are happening in the market. And when you're really immersed into the energy storage space, it's very easy to miss these and forget that they do have implications on how residential energy storage will develop. They can drive the market, or they could introduce alternative propositions. So we'll just take a minute to look at a couple of things that could complement or compete with storage.
So one of the technologies that can could both complement as well as compete with the storage is electric vehicles, which has been developing in recent years quite rapidly, and there is a lot of interest in electrical vehicles right now, and especially following scandals from Volkswagen, for example. So this is something that can have big implications as well on residential battery storage in general.
Certainly, and another topic we look at extensively at Delta is low carbon heating, and actually the combination of heat pump, PV system and battery storage, while let's face it, it is very expensive, but it really helps the customer increase self-consumption, reduces energy prices, increases self-sufficiency, and actually it helps to meet those targets that governments are setting out around decarbonizing heat. Another proposition we see emerging a lot is things around thermal energy storage. Well, we cannot forget that, let's take just the UK. There's 1.8 million homes with electric storage heaters. There's around 11 million homes that have hot water tanks. Now, these are huge storage resources that need to be tapped into. And there's some really interesting propositions emerging, such as VCharge in the UK, who aggregates storage heaters to provide frequency regulation, or new utility type of models where Thames Energy, for example, uses flexible residential and commercial loads to lower electricity costs. And let's not forget about the smart home. You know, this market is developing at a blistering pace. And actually, last year, our research from the Connected Home Service showed that around 1.3 million connected home appliances were sold. So, you know, this will change the way customers view and engage with their energy. And, you know, indirectly, this could influence energy storage. You know, tying energy storage into the smart home proposition will become increasingly important. And actually, you can find out a lot more about these different propositions, these new business models in our recent Energy Service Innovation Study. We're also conducting a study on demand response in Europe. So get in touch if you are interested in any of these other propositions. We're happy to have a conversation about it. So to tie this all together and provide you with some conclusions of today's webinar, we'd like to share our forecast as to how we see residential battery storage develop. And we'd also be quite interesting to hear your view. So we've chosen to show our forecast as in terms of cumulative deployment, in terms of capacity, so megawatt hours, and we are forecasting out to 2020 for the 3 key markets. So yes, of course, there may be other markets emerging, but we can see Germany, UK, and Italy for now being the core drivers, with some of the other German-speaking countries potentially adding a little bit. And as you can see here, you know, we expect the market or the installed base to grow more than 5-fold within the next 4-5 years. And as you can see, Germany will remain by far the strongest market, but the UK and Italy are both catching up, and especially beyond 2018 will show strong growth. But what's really crucial to understand is its evolution and not a revolution. And it will take time, and especially once we move away from the early innovators, more into the mass market, this could really become a tipping point and will be the make or break of the residential battery storage market. So following all that, we'd be really interested to do another poll and actually hear how you think our forecast stacks up and get your view. So we've just launched a poll. Please participate. The question is, how do you view our forecast? Do you think we're very low, so very conservative? Do you think it's low? Do you think it's about right? So, you know, you could imagine it going in that direction. Think it's too high? Do you think we're very optimistic? Or do you think we're overly bullish and it's really very high a forecast, and actually the market will be much smaller in the future?
So we're talking about a 5-fold increase in the market by from now till 2020. So not a massive increase, but strong growth. So essentially we're saying there is some reality behind the hype, but perhaps the hype has got slightly divorced from reality to some extent. So yeah, very interested in people's responses to what our forecast is, what our view is. I can see over 70% of people have voted so far, so very happy to give a few more seconds to people to respond to our forecast, see how in line we are with the majority view from across the industry. As I said earlier, we've got well over 100 people on the webinar today, so it's actually quite a representative I think vote from across the industry, because we have big utilities, small utilities, manufacturers, vendors, technology developers, a whole mix of different types of company as well on the call today. So I can see that the votes are starting to mainly come in, so we're up to about 85% of people have voted. So perhaps if we just publish the poll now, Julian?
Yeah, certainly. We'll close the poll now. And we'll share the results on your screen. Oh, can you?
Yeah, okay. So on your screen now, you should be able to see the results from the poll, so the reaction to the forecast that Julian and Valtz just presented. So 1% of people think that we're very low, 20% think we're actually on the low side, but actually 21% think we're on the high side. No one thinks that we're very high. 50% think we're, what's that, 58% people think that we're about right. So very interesting, and when you go back to the first poll, I think there were a third of people suggested at the beginning of the webinar that the market would be well over 1 million homes. It would be about 1 million homes, I think, by 2020. So perhaps the response at the end of the webinar is slightly more conservative than at the beginning of the session. So quite interesting. I'm very happy to share that with the audience today. I think it shows, I think there is a lot of cautious optimism perhaps in the industry around energy storage. There is an opportunity here, but you know, as usual in this industry, and certainly in Delta's experience over the last decade of looking at a range of technologies in distributed energy, things usually are harder and take longer than you want them to, and perhaps energy storage will be another example of that. So thank you for your participation. It'd be great now to just try and take a few questions if we can. I know quite a few questions have come in during the webinar, and we'll try and address some of them now in the sort of few minutes remaining at the end of the session. I noticed there was one question around why the paybacks in Germany were so much lower than the UK. Valts, and perhaps you'd like to comment on that. Why are the paybacks better for German customers than UK customers, even when we've excluded the subsidy?
Yeah, so the main reason for that, so in our forecast we assume that the battery storage price is going down by 50% in all three markets. However, the difference between Germany and UK is mainly due to the electricity price, which is higher than UK. So that is the main factor that plays into why the decrease in German paybacks in Germany is higher than in UK.
Thanks, Valts. And actually, there's another question that ties in quite nicely to it, which says why is the UK so much smaller market than Germany? Well, and actually, there's several reasons for that. We have to just look at that Germany had a head start to the UK, I would say, of about 3 years. They had the KfW support and tax and rebate on the loans that obviously improved the economics and helped kickstart the market. Even though applications are tailing off now, it was crucial to get that initial inertia going. While the UK is only really starting to develop now with the feed-in tariffs for PV dropping off, and there now being a lot of hype. So we do expect the UK market to take off, but it's just a few years behind the German market there, really.
Okay, thank you. There's quite a few questions there I can see around input assumptions to our payback calculations. Obviously, we'll be very happy to share in full detail with all of our subscribers, all of our input variables and our forecast for storage costs and electricity prices, etc. And very happy to speak to people on an individual basis, but probably we won't go into some of the input assumptions on this public webinar. So there's a question here, a simple one about what does VPP mean. Apologies for using an acronym there. It's a virtual power plant. VPP stands for virtual power plant. So the idea being that you have lots of distributed generation around in buildings, for example, so that you could, for example, connect lots of storage units, lots of battery units together and effectively run them as a single unit. So like a virtual power plant. So it's become quite a common and popular concept in the energy industry over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of questions around the model. Just to say, we won't be able to answer every question here, and we're very happy to follow up with you afterwards and send you some of the assumptions and have a discussion around that. See some questions around price decreases. We do expect price to decrease significantly by 2020 across the different markets. Yeah. There will be price decreases maybe around 30 to 50% for the actual batteries, and obviously there's also a lot of more equipment that goes into an integrated storage system. So talking about the battery inverters, talking about the electronics. So we can't just look at the battery cost decreases, but we have to look at the integrated system. But we do believe prices will fall to below €1,000 per kilowatt hour for an integrated storage system.
There's a question here from somebody asking, how does the result from the second poll relate to the first poll? How many installations does our forecast imply? And I think it really equates to the view in the first poll of hundreds of thousands of installations. So really, I think if this is right, Julian, our forecast implies that by 2020 we see a few 100,000 battery installations in European homes.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
So other questions? There's perhaps a question here around some of the added value. Quite interesting. You've talked about Fenecon, Julian, offering €400 a year potentially to customers, or even higher. I think up to 800 a year they've talked about. I mean, what's the reality of their ability to capture that amount of value, do you think, from the energy system?
Well, I think, we have to look at this from several perspectives. One market they're looking to tap in Germany would be the primary control reserve market, and now it's a quite a limited market. So one of the key things will be going forward, if there's a lot of energy storage deployed, especially larger grid scale storage as well, how will prices develop for that, and will they be able to maintain such a level of payment to the customer? Another aspect is around the trading of electricity, and now that's obviously a whole different topic, and it's those type of questions that we'll be looking to address throughout our research, and it could be potentially the topic for our next webinar, actually looking at different frequency, different ancillary services market and what value this gives to customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ancillary services markets themselves aren't that huge, and if everyone chases the same prize around frequency response or the PCR market in Germany, then perhaps that market could become saturated. So I think that will be certainly a very interesting topic for us to look at in more detail in the future.
We just had another questions around the slides. Yes, we will send the slides out after the webinar. Ideally, please send us an email with the contact details provided at the beginning of the webinar to ask for those slides. We'll put that up in a second again. So either email Andy, me, Valz, or the info@Delta email, and we will be sending the slides through. There's a lot of questions, as I said, and we will be following up with you.
There's a question here, perhaps just one or two more in the last couple of minutes. Question around time of use prices and how might this impact upon the payback calculations. I think that's a very, very good question, actually. At the moment, we don't have residential time of use tariffs, but in future, these clearly could become available to customers. And so the value of shifting demand from peak to off-peak could become more attractive than it is today. And certainly when we look at some of our case studies, for example, STEM or green charge networks in the US markets have some quite interesting business models which are effectively based upon shifting demand from peak periods to off-peak periods. It's really, only for commercial customers. It doesn't work for residential at the moment, but they're really focused on the commercial customers, and the models are really to enable commercial organizations in California to reduce their peak demand, which in California represents up to 70% actually of their energy bill. So, by reducing peak demand in California, you can actually make huge savings from a customer, which actually enables some of those companies to project finance storage. So the customer doesn't actually have to pay for the storage up front. So, that's just an example of in that particular market where huge differentials around peak have actually created the opportunity for some innovation around the business model, which allows storage to be deployed much quicker than would otherwise be the case. So if you see those types of peak differentials coming more into the European market, then yes, absolutely, we would expect it to have a positive impact on the deployment of storage here as well.
Certainly. I've just seen a few questions also on virtual storage concepts. Obviously, this is really, really interesting, and there's a few research projects already happening across Europe. There's also the ideas of a central store, which is being used by the customer to feed in their electricity. The example would be the MVV Strombank, which is certainly a very interesting trial, but really the virtual storage model right now is at that research stage, and it's actually something we are evaluating quite closely and looking at how that may become commercialized.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Julian. I think we should draw the webinar to a close now. We've just gone over 40 minutes. Thank you for all your questions. The ones that we haven't managed to respond to on the webinar, we certainly will make sure to reply to the individuals who submitted them. If you have any further questions that you think of after the webinar, please contact either Julian or myself by email, or feel free to give us a call. If you'd like to receive a copy of the slides, we're very happy to share those with you, but would ask that you send us an email and request them from us. So please, again, contact us and we'll forward the slides to you. If you have any feedback for us on the webinar, any thoughts, then we're very open and receptive to that. Suggestions for future webinars, very welcome to make those to us. But we'd be very happy to talk individually with subscribers, clearly around all the input assumptions to our calculations. And for all the non-subscribers on the call, we'd be very happy to talk with you in detail about the research, and be delighted to welcome you as a subscriber to this research offering in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, found it interesting and useful. Perhaps it's given you some confidence for the majority of our audience today that actually your views are in line with many of your peers across the industry. Perhaps those on the more optimistic side of the fence can take away a message that they need to actually be a bit more vocal and to be a bit more positive, perhaps to convince the majority in the industry that who have a more cautious view. So hope you enjoyed it today. Thank you for your time. We appreciate that very much and wish you a good day.
Thank you.